The smell of burnt coffee and old carpet hit me the second I walked into my grandmother's house for the reading of her will. She'd been gone 11 days, and already my brother had rearranged the living room furniture, like he was already settling in. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the door. The green armchair she'd had since 1987, the one she'd reupholstered herself twice, was pushed into the hallway like it was waiting to be thrown out. My brother was standing in the kitchen with his wife, both of them holding mugs that weren't theirs, laughing about something I hadn't been invited into. I set my bag down by the door and didn't say anything. There were maybe 15 people crammed into that living room, aunts and cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas 3 years ago, all of them orbiting my brother like he was already the one in charge. He had that energy about him, always had, the kind of person who fills a room before he's done anything worth noticing. The attorney arrived at 2. She was a woman in her late 50s, unhurried, with reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck. Her name was Miss Trenton, and she'd handled my grandmother's affairs for almost 2 decades. She sat at the dining room table, opened a manila folder, and waited until the room quieted. My grandmother had left her house to my brother. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a half-acre in Clarksville, Tennessee, assessed at just over $340,000. It had been in our family since 1971. My grandmother had raised 2 kids in that house, watched 4 grandchildren take their first steps on that carpet, hosted 50 years of Thanksgivings in that kitchen. And now it was his. My brother, whose name was Aaron, didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He just nodded slowly, the way people do when something confirms what they already believed about themselves. Then Miss Trenton turned the page. To my granddaughter Beth, she read, "I leave the storage facility on Route 9 and the surrounding half-acre of land." The room went quiet in a different way. A few people exchanged glances. My cousin by the window pressed her lips together like she was trying not to smile. A storage facility. My grandmother had left my brother a house worth $340,000, and she had left me a storage facility on the edge of town that I hadn't thought about in years. I used to drive past it as a kid and think it looked like the kind of place people hid things they were ashamed of. 24 units, half of them empty the last time I checked, a gravel lot, and a faded sign that had lost 2 of its letters sometime around 2015. Aaron looked at me from across the room. He had the same smug look he'd worn since we were teenagers, the one that said he'd already done the math and come out ahead. "Well," he said, voiced low enough that only I could hear, "at least it suits you." I kept my face still. I'd gotten good at that. His wife laughed quietly into her coffee. She'd never liked me, not from the first Thanksgiving Aaron brought her home. She had opinions about everything and shared them freely, and her opinion of me was that I was directionless, too proud, and probably jealous of the life Aaron had built. She'd said that last part out loud once, at Easter, and Aaron hadn't corrected her. After Miss Trenton finished reading, people started drifting toward the kitchen. Someone had brought a casserole. Someone else had brought rolls that were already going cold. I stood by the window for a while, watching the parking area, not trusting myself to speak yet. My grandmother had called me every Sunday for the past 6 years. Every single Sunday, without fail, even when I was living in Phoenix doing field surveys for the civil engineering firm I'd been with since I was 26. We'd talk for 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. She'd ask about my projects, about the sites I was working, about whether I was eating enough and sleeping enough, and whether the men at the office were treating me fairly. She was the only person in my family who asked about my work like she actually wanted to understand it. I didn't know why she'd left me a storage facility instead of something that mattered. Aaron found me by the window. He'd loosened up now that the reading was over, relaxed into the version of himself he became when he felt like he'd won something. "No hard feelings," he said. "I don't have hard feelings." "Good, because honestly, Beth, it's better this way. You travel so much, you're never in one place long enough to manage a property. The house needs someone who's actually going to be here." He said it like it was reasonable, like he was doing me a favor by inheriting a house worth $340,000. "I wasn't aware grandmother's estate was organized around your convenience," I said. His expression flickered. Just briefly. She always worried about you, he said. Said you were too independent for your own good. That you'd wake up someday and realize you'd been so busy working that you'd missed everything that mattered. I looked at him steadily. She said that to you? Plenty of times. I nodded once and walked away. His wife caught my arm near the kitchen doorway. She was carrying her mug with both hands and wearing an expression of practiced sympathy. You know, Aaron really did step up for Grandma these last couple years, she said, coming by on weekends, helping with yard work. It's only fair the house went to him. Nobody said it wasn't fair, I said. I just want you to understand where it's coming from. I do, I said. I understand exactly where it's coming from. I left before the casserole was served. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. I sat in the parking lot for a while with the engine off, thinking about my grandmother and the storage units and Aaron's face during the reading. I thought about all the Sundays we talked on the phone and tried to remember if she'd ever mentioned the facility, ever given me a hint about what she was planning. She hadn't, or at least I hadn't understood it if she had. That night, my mother called. She led with the weather in Clarksville, then the casserole, then finally got to the point. Aaron thinks maybe the two of you could work something out about the storage facility. He knows some people in commercial real estate who might be interested in the property. He wants to buy it from me, I said. He just wants to be helpful, Beth. You don't know anything about running a storage business. He has connections. It might make sense to let him handle it and just take the cash. Mom, you more meisterde the trio cat. What? She left it to me. A pause. I know she did, but you have to be practical. You're not even based here. I'll figure it out. Another pause. Longer. Aaron thinks you're holding on to it just to be difficult. I set the phone face down on the counter and stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I picked it back up. Tell Aaron I'll be in touch, I said, and ended the call. I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about the storage facility in the way you think about something you've been avoiding, turning it over, looking at it from different angles. I'd driven past it 100 times growing up and never paid attention. I didn't even know when my grandmother had bought it or how long she'd owned it. I didn't know if it was profitable, what the lease agreements looked like, whether the property taxes were current. What I did know was civil engineering. I knew land. I knew soil and drainage and property surveys and how to read geological reports the way most people read menus. That was my job. That was what I'd been doing for 8 years. The next morning, I called in a favor from a colleague in Nashville and had a preliminary property report pulled by noon. What I found made me sit down. The storage facility sat on a half-acre of commercially zoned land along Route 9. On its own, the facility generated modest income, nothing impressive. But the land itself had been reassessed the previous spring as part of a county infrastructure planning study. Route 9 was being widened. The state had earmarked funding for a major commercial corridor expansion through that exact stretch of road, and the eminent domain acquisition list, which was public record, included 3 parcels on that corridor. My grandmother's half-acre was one of them. The assessed compensation rate for comparable parcels in the corridor study was between $800,000 and $1.2 million per acre. I read the number 3 times. Then I called my colleague back and asked her to pull the full corridor report. She called back 40 minutes later and said, "Beth, do you know what you're sitting on?" I was starting to. Aaron texted me that evening. Casual, friendly, like we hadn't had the exchange we'd had at the house. "Hey, wanted to follow up on what Mom mentioned. Happy to connect you with my realtor contact if you want to talk numbers on the storage property. No pressure." I didn't respond. He called 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message about timing, about how the market was unpredictable, about how he just wanted to make sure I wasn't making a decision based on emotion rather than logic. He used the word practical 3 times. I spent those 2 days reading everything I could find about the Route 9 corridor project. I pulled the state filings, the County Planning Commission minutes, the environmental impact assessments. The project had been in planning for 4 years. Construction was slated to begin in 14 months. The acquisition phase was already underway. My grandmother had known, she had to have known. The reassessment had happened in the spring, and she'd updated her will in July. She hadn't left me a rundown storage facility. She'd left me the thing underneath it. I drove out to the property on a Thursday afternoon. It was greyer than I remembered, a row of orange roll-up doors, a cinder block office with a flickering light above the entrance, gravel that needed replenishing. But the land itself was flat and clean, good drainage, and the Route 9 frontage was exactly what the dot needed for the expanded right-of-way. The man who managed the facility was named Mr. Kowalski, 60-something, wearing a Vanderbilt cap and work gloves. He looked surprised when I introduced myself. "You're Helen's granddaughter," he said, "the engineer." "That's me." "She talked about you." He pulled off one glove and shook my hand. "Said you had a good head for property, said you'd know what to do with this place when the time came." My throat tightened. "She told you that?" "About 6 months ago. She came by, walked the whole lot, took some photos, said she'd been doing her homework." He paused. I figured she meant the expansion. She'd been following the Route 9 project for a while. I looked out at the row of storage units. "She never mentioned it to me." "No," he said. "I don't think she wanted to. I think she wanted you to find it yourself." He put the glove back on. "She was proud of you. Said you were the kind of person who needed to discover things, not be handed them." I stood in that gravel lot for a long time after he went back inside. On the drive home, Aaron called again. I answered this time. "Hey," he said. "Glad you picked up. Listen, my contact at Redfern Commercial wants to set up a walkthrough next week if you're open to it. They have a buyer who's been looking in that area, and the offer could be pretty strong, like over ask." "How much over ask?" I said. He named a number. It was $185,000. I kept my voice even. "I'll think about it." "Honestly, Beth, I wouldn't wait too long. Buyers come and go. You don't want to miss a window." "I'll let you know," I said, and hung up. He had no idea what the property was worth. Either that, or he did know and was hoping I didn't. I spent a week getting everything in order. I called the county planning office and confirmed the acquisition timeline. I pulled the property's title history and had it reviewed by a real estate attorney in Clarksville named Miss Pires Hendricks, who'd been handling land disputes in Montgomery County for 30 years. I sent her the corridor study, the reassessment documents, and my grandmother's will. She called me back on a Tuesday morning. "Your grandmother was a smart woman," she said. "I'm starting to fully understand that," I said. "The acquisition offer from the state will come formally within the next 6 to 8 months. Based on comparable parcels and the frontage footage, you're looking at a floor of around $650,000. Could go higher depending on negotiation." I exhaled slowly. "What do I need to do to protect it?" "Already done, mostly," she said. "Your grandmother made sure the deed was clean. No liens, no encumbrances. I'll file a protection notice with the county so no one can challenge the inheritance before the acquisition completes. You'll be locked in." That last part mattered more than I let on. I'd heard from my mother twice more that week, both times with some version of the same suggestion. Maybe Beth should reconsider. Maybe Aaron and his contacts could handle the sale better. Maybe it was simpler to just let the family work it out together. The word together in my family had always meant Aaron. I didn't tell her what I'd found. Not yet. The confrontation I'd been expecting came on a Saturday. Aaron showed up at the facility unannounced. I was there reviewing some maintenance records with Mr. Kowalski when Aaron's truck pulled into the gravel lot. He got out with his hands in his jacket pockets, scanning the property like he was seeing it for the first time. His wife was in the passenger seat. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said. "Is my property," I said. He gave a small laugh, like I'd said something slightly unreasonable. "I know that. I'm just saying if you want, we could take a look together. Get a sense of what it would take to make it sellable." "It's already sellable." He looked at the faded sign, the cracked pavement near the office door, the unit with the slightly bent frame on door 14. "It needs work, Beth. You'd have to put money in before you'd get anything decent out." "Or I wouldn't have to do anything at all," I said. He tilted his head. What does that mean? I hadn't planned to tell him here, but something about the way he was looking at the property, the way he was already calculating how to package it and sell it and extract the most value before I could understand what I had, made me set the maintenance records down. Do you know about the Route 9 expansion? I said. A flicker, too fast for most people to catch, but I'd been watching my brother's face for 32 years. He knew. I've heard something about roadwork, he said carefully. The state is widening the corridor, commercial expansion. They're acquiring parcels along the route through eminent domain. I kept my voice level. This parcel is on the acquisition list. The compensation estimate is over $500,000, maybe closer to $700,000 depending on how negotiations go. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. Grandma knew, I said. She updated her will 4 months after the reassessment. She left me this property specifically because she knew what it was worth. Aaron's jaw shifted. You don't know that? Mr. Kowalski does, I said. She came by personally and told him. His wife had rolled down the window of the truck. She was watching us with an expression I couldn't fully read. Beth, Aaron started, his voice dropping into the register he used when he was trying to sound reasonable. Think about this practically. You split it. You both walk away with something real. It's fair. She left it to me, I said. Entirely. Intentionally. She was old. She might not have understood. Don't, I said. The word came out flat, quiet, and it stopped him. Don't finish that sentence. He looked at me for a moment, recalibrating. Then he tried a different angle. You've always been like this. You get something and you hold it so tight you can't see straight. This is family money, Beth. No, I said. This is my grandmother's money which she chose to leave to me. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient. His wife got out of the truck. She walked over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nobody's trying to take anything from you. We're just saying there's a smarter way to handle this. Aaron has the relationships. You have the asset. It makes sense to combine them. I have an attorney, I said, and a very clear deed. That ended the conversation. Aaron stood in the gravel lot a beat longer than necessary, then got back in his truck. His wife followed, slower, like she was making a point about not being rushed. The truck reversed out and drove away, and I stood there until the sound of the engine faded. Mr. Kowalski came to the door of the office. He'd heard most of it. He didn't say anything, just gave me a single nod. I nodded back. My mother called that night. I answered. Aaron says you were rude to him, she said. I told him the property was mine. I don't think that qualifies as rude. He's your brother, Beth. I know who he is. She sighed, the long-practiced kind. Your grandmother would have wanted the family to stay together. She wouldn't want this to become a fight. Grandma left it to me, Mom. She had 30 years to leave it to someone else. She didn't. A long pause. What's so special about a storage facility that you're willing to blow up the whole family over it? I almost told her then. I almost let it out. The corridor report, the numbers, Miss Hendricks's call, all of it. But I stopped myself. I'll let you know when there's something to share, I said. The formal acquisition offer arrived 9 weeks later. Miss Hendricks called me on a Wednesday morning. The state came in at $710,000, she said, and I think we can push for $740,000 with a counter. They want the parcel clean and uncontested, so they're motivated. I sat with that number for a moment. Then I said, push. They came back at $728,000. We settled at $731,500. I signed the papers on a Friday afternoon in Miss Hendricks's office, a quiet room with a window that looked out over a parking lot. When it was done, she shook my hand and said, Your grandmother chose well. She did, I said. I called my mother on the drive home. I have something to tell you, I said. I explained the corridor project, the acquisition, the final settlement number. I kept it simple and clear. By the time I finished, she'd gone quiet on the other end. $731,000, she said, like she was checking to make sure she'd heard correctly. And some change, yes. Another silence. Then softly, she knew. She knew. I heard my mother set something down. A glass, maybe, or her phone against a hard surface. I told you to sell it, she said. I told you to let Aaron handle it. You did. Beth. Her voice had shifted. The practiced calm was gone. I'm sorry, I didn't understand what she'd done. I know you didn't. Aaron called that evening. I let him leave a voicemail. He'd heard from Mom, he said. He was glad things had worked out. He used the word family twice and said something about how he hoped this wouldn't affect things long term. He sounded like a man who had just realized he'd been playing the wrong game. I didn't call him back that night. What I did was sit at my kitchen table with a legal pad and start writing. My grandmother had given me more than property. She'd given me capital, which in my field meant options. Over the next 3 weeks, I mapped out a plan I'd been turning over in the back of my mind since the day I'd stood in that gravel lot and understood what she'd left me. There was a non-profit I'd read about 2 years earlier in a trade publication, a small organization in Nashville that helped women entering the construction and infrastructure trades with certification costs, tools, and mentorship connections. They were doing real work, but they were underfunded and operating out of a borrowed office. I'd bookmarked their website and forgotten about it. I found it again. I called their director, a woman named Ms. Vance, on a Tuesday morning. I told her I had a contact who might be interested in making a significant contribution and asked if she'd be open to a conversation. She was cautiously enthusiastic. 3 weeks later, I made a contribution that covered 2 years of their operating costs and funded a new tool loan program for women completing their first field certifications. It wasn't the whole settlement. It was a portion, the right portion, the one that did something my grandmother would have recognized. The rest went into a real estate trust that Miss Hendricks helped me structure, the first piece of something I was building deliberately, on my own terms, with my own name on it. The morning the contribution was made public on the non-profit's website, my mother called again. I saw what you did, she said. The donation. Yeah. Your grandmother would have loved that. I think so too. She was quiet for a moment. Then I should have listened to you from the beginning. You didn't know, I said. I didn't know for a while either. That was true. What I didn't say was that my grandmother had trusted me to find out, trusted me to look close enough, trusted me not to sell before I understood what I was selling. That was its own kind of gift, bigger maybe than the money. Aaron and I haven't talked much since. We're civil at family things, polite in the way people are polite when there's too much history to untangle all at once. He shook my hand at our cousin's wedding in the spring and said something genuinely kind about the donation, and I think he meant it. People are more complicated than the worst things they do. But I don't forget what he said in our grandmother's living room the day of the reading. At least it suits you. He was right, actually, just not the way he meant it. My grandmother didn't leave me a consolation prize. She left me something she knew I would understand, something she trusted I'd have the patience and the skill and the stubbornness to see through. She'd been watching me work for 8 years, listening to me talk about land surveys and drainage studies and corridor assessments every Sunday on the phone. She knew exactly what she was doing. And standing in that gravel lot on the last day I walked the property before the state took it over, I understood something I hadn't understood at the reading. Something about what it means to be seen by someone who knows you well enough to leave you exactly the right thing. I took a photo of the faded sign before I left. It's on my desk now, next to a framed copy of the corridor assessment that started everything. Some days I look at it and think about what Aaron saw when he looked at that property. A liability, a punchline, something less than what he'd gotten. Some days I think that's the real difference between us. Not luck, not inheritance, just the willingness to look closer. I still have the photo of that faded sign on my desk. Some mornings I look at it before I open my laptop and think about how close I came to selling it for $185,000 because my brother made me feel like I didn't know what I was doing. That's the thing nobody tells you about being underestimated by your own family. It doesn't just sting, it gets inside you. It makes you second-guess things you actually know. Aaron had been doing that my entire life, quietly, consistently, with a smile that said he was just being practical. And the scariest part is that it almost worked. If I hadn't pulled that property report, if I hadn't called in that favor from my colleague in Nashville, I would have signed whatever his realtor put in front of me and walked away thinking I'd gotten a fair deal. My grandmother knew I wouldn't do that. That's why she left it to me. She'd been listening to me talk about land and surveys and infrastructure corridors for 6 years on those Sunday calls. She understood what I did before most people in my own life did. She didn't leave me the storage facility because she thought it was worthless and I deserved less. She left it to me because she knew I was the only one who would stop and actually look. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the money, though the money changed things. There's no point pretending otherwise. What I keep coming back to is the act of looking. The decision to not take someone else's word for what something is worth, to go find out yourself. That's not something you're born with. It's something you build, slowly, through doing the work even when nobody's watching, through developing the kind of judgment that holds up under pressure. Aaron saw a gravel lot with a faded sign. I saw a piece of land with a legal description and a county planning number, and I knew how to find out what that meant. That difference didn't come from luck. It came from 8 years of showing up and learning things that were hard to learn. There's a version of this story where I take the easy way out, where I let Aaron's confidence substitute for my own, where I tell myself he knows more about these things, he has the connections, he's always been better at the practical stuff. I almost wrote that version. The only thing that stopped me was a stubborn refusal to accept that my grandmother's last gift to me was an accident. She was not a careless woman. Every single Sunday for 6 years, she asked questions and listened to the answers. She paid attention, and at the end of her life, she made a deliberate choice about who could be trusted to see clearly when it mattered most. I think about that whenever something gets hard, not just in work, but in any situation where someone louder and more confident is telling me what things are worth. The question is never whether they sound certain. The question is whether I've done the work to know for myself. My brother shook my hand at my cousin's wedding and said something kind about the donation. I believe he meant it. People are not simply the worst thing they've ever done, and I'm not interested in carrying that weight forever. But I also don't forget what his certainty almost cost me, and I don't forget what my grandmother's quiet belief in me actually gave me. She left me exactly what I needed, not because it was easy, but because she trusted me to find out why.